Lieutenant Sarah Chun stood at the entrance of the Naval Special Warfare Training Facility, her crisp uniform pressed to perfection despite the humid Virginia morning. At 28, she carried herself with the quiet confidence that came from years of proving herself in a world that constantly questioned her presence. Her dark hair was pulled back in regulation style, and her brown eyes held a steely determination that had seen her through countless challenges. The facility buzzed with activity as the newest class of SEAL recruits prepared for their first day of advanced training. Sarah had been assigned as the liaison officer for this particular group, a role that required her to coordinate between the training staff and the recruits while ensuring all protocols were followed. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was necessary, and Sarah approached every assignment with the same level of dedication that had earned her rapid promotion through the ranks. As she walked toward the briefing room, Sarah could hear the familiar sounds of military preparation. Boots clicking against polished floors, muffled conversations, and the occasional bark of orders from senior enlisted personnel. The smell of coffee and cleaning supplies mixed with the underlying scent of determination and nervous energy that permeated any military training environment. The recruits were already assembled when Sarah entered the briefing room. 24 men, all in their early 20s to mid-30s, representing the best and brightest that the Navy had to offer. They had already survived basic underwater demolition/SEAL training, known simply as BUD/S, which meant they had endured some of the most grueling physical and mental challenges the military could devise. Now, they were here for specialized training that would prepare them for real-world missions. Sarah took her position at the front of the room, setting down her folder of briefing materials on the podium. The conversations died down as the recruits noticed her presence, though she could sense the subtle shift in energy that always occurred when she entered a room full of male warriors. Some faces showed genuine respect, others barely concealed skepticism, and a few displayed the kind of dismissive attitude she had learned to navigate with skill and patience. "Good morning, gentlemen," Sarah began, her voice carrying clearly through the room. "I'm Lieutenant Chun, and I'll be serving as your liaison officer during this training cycle. My job is to ensure that you have everything you need to succeed while maintaining the highest standards of military bearing and protocol." From the back of the room, she heard a low chuckle followed by a whispered comment that wasn't quite quiet enough to escape her notice. "Great, they gave us a babysitter." The comment came from Petty Officer Jake Morrison, a tall, broad-shouldered man with sandy hair and the kind of cocky smile that suggested he had never encountered a challenge he couldn't overcome through sheer confidence. Sarah's expression didn't change, but she made a mental note of Morrison's face and attitude. She had encountered his type before, the kind of warrior who confused arrogance with confidence and mistake disrespect for humor. In her experience, these men either learned quickly or found themselves struggling with concepts that had nothing to do with physical strength or tactical knowledge. "Your schedule for the next 6 weeks is demanding," Sarah continued, moving to the large whiteboard behind her. "You'll be covering advanced maritime operations, close quarters combat, intelligence gathering, and specialized weapons training. Each day will begin at 0500 with physical training, followed by classroom instruction and practical exercises that will test everything you've learned." As she outlined the training schedule, Sarah noticed the varying levels of attention among the recruits. Most were taking notes and asking thoughtful questions about logistics and expectations. A few, however, seemed more interested in testing boundaries than understanding requirements. "Ma'am," called out Petty Officer Tom Bradley, a stocky man with dark hair and intense green eyes. "What's your background in special operations? Have you been through any of the training we'll be doing?" It was a fair question, the kind that any good warrior would ask about someone in a position of authority. Sarah appreciated direct communication and had no problem addressing legitimate concerns about her qualifications. "I'm a surface warfare officer with specializations in naval intelligence and logistics coordination," Sarah replied. "While I haven't been through SEAL training, I've spent the last 5 years working directly with special operations units in various capacities, including deployments to Afghanistan and the Mediterranean. My job isn't to teach you how to be SEALs. That's what your instructors are for. My job is to ensure that the administrative and logistical aspects of your training run smoothly, so you can focus on becoming the warriors your country needs." Morrison leaned back in his chair, his expression suggesting he found her response inadequate. "So basically, you're here to handle paperwork while we do the real work." The room fell silent. Even the recruits who had been relatively respectful up to this point seemed interested in how this confrontation would play out. Sarah had been in similar situations countless times throughout her career, moments where her authority and competence were challenged not because of any failure on her part, but simply because of assumptions about what a woman could or should be doing in a military environment. Petty Officer Morrison, Sarah said, her voice remaining calm and professional. I'm here to ensure that this training cycle produces the highest quality special operations personnel possible. That includes managing resources, coordinating with multiple departments, handling security clearances, and addressing any issues that might interfere with your learning. If you consider that paperwork, then yes, I handle paperwork. The same kind of paperwork that ensures you have ammunition for your weapons, intelligence for your missions, and support when things go wrong in the field. Morrison's smirk widened. Fair enough, ma'am. I'm sure you're very good at your job. It's just that some of us are wondering why they couldn't assign someone with actual combat experience to work with us. Maybe someone who understands what we're really preparing for. The challenge was clear, and Sarah could see that other recruits were watching to see how she would handle it. This wasn't just about Morrison anymore. It was about establishing the respect and authority she would need to do her job effectively. In her years of military service, Sarah had learned that respect couldn't be demanded. It had to be earned, but she also knew that she couldn't allow insubordination to go unchecked. Petty Officer Morrison, Sarah said, moving closer to his desk. I understand that you want to work with people who have proven themselves in combat. That's a reasonable expectation for someone in your position. However, I would suggest that you focus on proving yourself worthy of the training you're about to receive rather than questioning the qualifications of the people who are here to help you succeed. Morrison's expression hardened. I'm not questioning your qualifications, ma'am. I'm just saying that maybe someone who's actually been in a firefight might have more credibility when it comes to preparing us for what we're going to face. The room tension was palpable. Sarah could see that some of the other recruits were uncomfortable with Morrison's increasingly confrontational attitude, while others seemed to be enjoying the drama. She knew that how she handled this moment would set the tone for the entire training cycle. You're absolutely right, Sarah said, surprising everyone in the room. Combat experience does provide a certain kind of credibility that can't be replicated in any other way. It teaches you things about yourself and about warfare that no amount of classroom instruction can provide. Morrison looked pleased with himself, apparently thinking he had won the exchange. Exactly. So maybe you can understand why some of us might have questions. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. I can understand that perspective. Let me ask you something, Petty Officer Morrison. How many combat deployments have you completed? Morrison's expression faltered slightly. Well, I haven't been deployed yet. That's what this training is preparing me for. I see. And how many times have you been responsible for coordinating logistics support for special operations missions? That's not really my area, Morrison admitted, his confidence beginning to waver. Have you ever been responsible for managing classified intelligence that could affect the lives of operators in the field? Morrison was silent now, apparently beginning to realize that the conversation wasn't going in the direction he had intended. Have you ever had to make decisions that could impact the success or failure of a mission while operating under political and legal constraints that could change at any moment? The room was completely quiet now. Sarah wasn't attacking Morrison, but she was methodically demonstrating that experience came in many forms and that his assumptions about her background and qualifications were based on incomplete information. The truth is, Sarah continued, that every person in this room, including me, has something to learn from the people around them. Your instructors will teach you tactics and techniques. Your fellow recruits will challenge you and support you in ways that will make you better warriors. And yes, I will handle the administrative and logistical aspects of your training because those aspects are crucial to mission success and they require their own set of skills and experience. She paused, looking around the room to make eye contact with as many recruits as possible. The question isn't whether any of us has enough experience to be here. The question is whether we're all committed to doing our jobs at the highest possible level so that you leave here as the kind of operators that American can depend on when everything is on the line. Morrison shifted uncomfortably in his seat, apparently realizing that his challenge had backfired. I didn't mean any disrespect, ma'am. I know you didn't, Sarah replied, though her tone suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. You're here because you want to be the best, and that kind of drive is exactly what this program is designed to harness. But Being the best isn't just about individual capability. It's about working effectively with everyone around you, regardless of their role or background. The briefing continued without further incident, but Sarah could sense that the dynamic in the room had shifted. Some of the recruits now looked at her with increased respect, while others seemed to be reassessing their initial assumptions. Morrison himself remained quiet for the rest of the session, though she could tell he wasn't entirely satisfied with how the exchange had concluded. After dismissing the recruits for their first practical exercise, Sarah remained in the briefing room to organize her materials and prepare for the next session. She was accustomed to these kinds of challenges and had developed thick skin over the years, but each incident still required energy and attention that could have been better spent on more productive activities. "Excuse me, ma'am?" Sarah looked up to see Petty Officer Bradley approaching her desk. Unlike Morrison, Bradley had impressed her during the briefing with his thoughtful questions and professional demeanor. "What can I do for you?" "Petty Officer Bradley." "I wanted to apologize for Morrison's behavior," Bradley said. "That was out of line, and it doesn't represent how most of us feel about working with you." Sarah appreciated the gesture, though she was careful not to let her guard down too quickly. In her experience, the people who were most vocal about supporting her weren't always the ones she could count on when it really mattered. "I appreciate that," Sarah said. "But you don't need to apologize for someone else's behavior. Every person here is responsible for their own actions and attitudes." Bradley nodded. "Yes, ma'am. I just wanted you to know that some of us are more interested in learning from everyone we work with than we are in trying to establish some kind of hierarchy based on who's tougher." "That's good to hear," Sarah replied. "The best operators I've worked with have been the ones who were secure enough in their own abilities to respect the expertise of everyone around them." As Bradley left to join his classmates, Sarah reflected on the morning's events. The confrontation with Morrison had been predictable, but it still served as a reminder of the challenges she faced in environments where her presence was seen as unusual or inappropriate by some people. She had worked hard to reach her current position, excelling in every assignment and consistently exceeding expectations. Her performance reviews were filled with commendations from superiors who valued her analytical skills, leadership potential, and ability to work effectively under pressure. She had proven herself in training exercises, real-world operations, and high-stakes situations that would have challenged anyone regardless of gender. Yet none of that seemed to matter to people like Morrison, who saw her rank and position as somehow illegitimate simply because she didn't fit their preconceived notions of what a military leader should look like. It was frustrating, but Sarah had learned long ago that she couldn't control other people's attitudes. She could only control her own performance and professionalism. The first week of training proceeded smoothly, with Sarah managing the complex logistics of coordinating between multiple instructional teams, ensuring that equipment and facilities were available when needed, and addressing the countless small issues that inevitably arose in any intensive training environment. The recruits were beginning to settle into the demanding routine, and most were demonstrating the kind of dedication and skill that had earned them their places in the program. Morrison, however, continued to be a source of tension. While he never again challenged Sarah directly, his attitude remained skeptical, and his comments often carried subtle undertones of disrespect. During briefings, he would ask questions that seemed designed more to test her knowledge than to gain useful information. In group discussions, he would make remarks that subtly undermined her authority without crossing the line into outright insubordination. Sarah chose to address these incidents professionally, focusing on the substance of his questions and comments rather than their underlying tone. She knew that any overreaction on her part would only feed into stereotypes about women being overly sensitive or unable to handle conflict. Instead, she continued to demonstrate competence and professionalism, trusting that most of the recruits would judge her based on her performance rather than Morrison's innuendos. The strategy seemed to be working. As the days passed, Sarah noticed that more recruits were approaching her with legitimate questions and concerns, and fewer seemed to be influenced by Morrison's negative attitude. She began to develop working relationships with several of the men, who proved to be professional, intelligent, and genuinely interested in making the most of their training opportunity. One evening, after a particularly challenging day of exercises, Sarah was in her office reviewing the next day's schedule when she heard a knock on her door. She looked up to see Chief Petty Officer Mike Rodriguez, one of the senior instructors, standing in her doorway. "Come in, Chief," Sarah said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. Rodriguez was a veteran of multiple deployments and had earned the respect of everyone at the facility through his knowledge, experience, and leadership. He was known for being direct and honest, qualities that Sarah valued in anyone she worked with. "I want to talk to you about some of the dynamics I'm seeing with this recruit class," Rodriguez said, settling into the chair. "I'm listening," Sarah replied, though she suspected she knew where the conversation was heading. "Morrison's been running his mouth during the practical exercises," Rodriguez said bluntly. "Nothing I can write him up for, but he's been making comments about female leadership that are affecting some of the other recruits." Sarah wasn't surprised, but she was grateful that Rodriguez was bringing it to her attention. "What kind of comments?" "The usual garbage about women not understanding what real warriors go through, questioning whether someone without combat experience should be in a position of authority over people who are training for combat roles. Like I said, nothing overt, but it's there." Sarah considered her response carefully. She didn't want to appear weak or unable to handle the situation herself, but she also recognized that Rodriguez's perspective as a senior instructor carried weight that hers might not. "How are the other recruits responding?" "Most of them are ignoring it," Rodriguez said. "A few seem to be buying into it, but the majority are more interested in focusing on their training. The problem is that Morrison's attitude is becoming a distraction from what we're trying to accomplish here." Sarah nodded. "I appreciate you bringing this to my attention. Do you have any recommendations for how to address it?" Rodriguez leaned forward. "In my experience, guys like Morrison respond to one thing: being shown that they're wrong in a way that can't be argued with or explained away. He's made assumptions about your background and capabilities based on limited information. Maybe it's time to give him more complete information." Sarah understood what Rodriguez was suggesting, but she was hesitant to reveal details about her background that she preferred to keep private. Throughout her career, she had tried to let her work speak for itself rather than relying on her personal history to establish credibility. "I'll think about it," she said finally. Rodriguez stood to leave. "Whatever you decide, you have my support. I've worked with a lot of officers over the years, and you're one of the good ones. Don't let some punk recruit make you question that." After Rodriguez left, Sarah sat in her office thinking about the conversation. She had always believed that her military record and professional performance should be sufficient to establish her credibility, regardless of what anyone thought about her gender or background. But she was also realistic about the challenges she faced and the impact that those challenges could have on her ability to do her job effectively. The truth was that Sarah's background was more complex than most people realized. She had indeed spent time in combat zones, though not in the traditional role that most people associated with combat experience. Her work in naval intelligence had taken her into dangerous situations where she had been required to make life and death decisions under extreme pressure. She had seen combat, just not in the way that people like Morrison would expect or understand. But revealing those details felt like giving in to the idea that she needed to prove herself according to someone else's definition of legitimacy. She had worked too hard to establish herself as a professional who should be judged on her own merits to start trading on experiences that had nothing to do with her current role and responsibilities. The second week of training brought new challenges and intensified the pressure on all the recruits. Advanced maritime operations required them to master complex equipment while operating in conditions that tested their physical and mental limits. Sarah found herself working longer hours to coordinate the various moving parts of the training schedule, ensuring that boats, diving equipment, and specialized gear were available when needed. During this period, she began to notice a troubling pattern. Morrison's influence seemed to be growing among a small group of recruits who had started to adopt his skeptical attitude toward her authority. The group included Petty Officer James Walker, a quiet man from Texas who rarely spoke up during briefings, but seemed to hang on Morrison's every word, and Petty Officer David Kim, whose initial respectfulness had gradually given way to subtle signs of disrespect. The situation came to a head during a particularly complex training exercise that required precise coordination between multiple teams. Sarah had spent hours the night before reviewing the logistics plan, checking weather conditions, and ensuring that all safety protocols were in place. The exercise involved night operations in choppy waters, with teams practicing infiltration and extraction techniques that would be critical in real-world missions. Everything was proceeding smoothly until an equipment malfunction forced Sarah to make a quick decision about whether to continue the exercise or abort for safety reasons. The malfunction involved a critical piece of diving equipment that one of the teams needed for their assigned mission. Sarah quickly assessed the situation, consulted with the safety officer, and determined that the exercise could continue safely using backup equipment. But the affected team would need to modify their approach. Her decision was sound from both a safety and training perspective, but it required her to interrupt the exercise to brief the team leaders on the necessary adjustments. As she addressed the group, she could see Morrison and his followers exchanging glances that clearly communicated their skepticism about her judgment. "This is exactly what I'm talking about," Morrison muttered to Walker, apparently thinking his voice was too low for Sarah to hear. "She's making decisions about operations she doesn't understand." Sarah heard the comment, but chose to focus on completing the briefing and getting the exercise back on track. However, she made a mental note that Morrison's disrespectful behavior was escalating and would need to be addressed soon. The exercise resumed and was completed successfully, with all teams achieving their objectives despite the equipment malfunction. During the debriefing session, the instructors praised the recruits for their adaptability and noted that the kind of equipment failures they had experienced were common in real-world operations. Sarah's quick decision-making had actually enhanced the training value of the exercise by forcing the teams to practice the kind of on-the-fly problem-solving they would need in actual missions. Despite the successful outcome, Morrison seemed determined to find fault with Sarah's handling of the situation. During a break in the debriefing, he approached several other recruits and began voicing his opinions about her decision. "I'm telling you guys, that could have been a disaster," Morrison said, his voice carrying more than he apparently realized. "She made a call about diving operations without really understanding what we were facing down there. In a real mission, that kind of mistake could get people killed." Petty Officer Bradley, who had been listening to Morrison's complaints, finally spoke up. "What mistake?" The exercise was completed successfully, and everyone learned something valuable about adapting to equipment failures. Morrison turned to face Bradley, his expression showing irritation at being challenged. The mistake was risking people's safety to avoid looking weak. She should have aborted the exercise and rescheduled, but she didn't want to look like she couldn't handle the pressure. "That's a pretty serious accusation," Bradley replied. "Were you paying attention during the safety briefing?" She consulted with Chief Rodriguez and the safety officer before making the decision. "If they thought it was unsafe, don't you think they would have spoken up?" Morrison's jaw tightened. Maybe they were just being polite. "Look, I'm not trying to cause problems, but we're training for missions where people's lives are going to depend on the decisions that get made. I want to know that the people making those decisions really understand what they're dealing with." The conversation might have continued, but Chief Rodriguez appeared and called for the debriefing to resume. As the recruits took their seats, Sarah noticed that the room felt more divided than it had before. Morrison's constant criticism was beginning to have an effect, and she could see that some recruits who had previously been neutral were starting to question her competence. That evening, Sarah sat in her quarters reviewing the events of the day and trying to decide how to address the situation. She had dealt with difficult personalities throughout her career, but Morrison presented a unique challenge because his criticisms weren't entirely without merit from his perspective. He was asking legitimate questions about experience and judgment, even if his manner of asking was disrespectful and his conclusions were wrong. She thought about her conversation with Chief Rodriguez and his suggestion that she provide more complete information about her background. The truth was that Sarah had more relevant experience than Morrison knew, but she had always been reluctant to discuss the details of her intelligence work, partly for security reasons, and partly because she didn't want to be seen as trading on experiences that were supposed to remain classified. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. The caller ID showed it was Commander Patricia Hayes, Sarah's mentor and former commanding officer, calling from her current assignment at the Pentagon. "Sarah, how are things going with the new training class?" Commander Hayes asked after they had exchanged greetings. Sarah hesitated, unsure how much to reveal about the challenges she was facing. Commander Hayes had been instrumental in Sarah's career development, and Sarah valued her advice, but she also didn't want to appear unable to handle her current assignment. "There's some interesting dynamics," Sarah said finally. "Nothing I can't handle, but some of the recruits are testing boundaries." Commander Hayes chuckled. "Let me guess. Some hotshot who thinks women don't belong in leadership positions is making your life difficult?" Sarah was surprised by how accurately Commander Hayes had read the situation. "Something like that." "How did you know?" "Because I've been where you are, and because some things never change." The good news is that most warriors eventually figure out that competence matters more than gender. The bad news is that the process isn't always smooth. What did you do when you faced similar situations? Commander Hayes was quiet for a moment. I try to let my work speak for itself, but sometimes that's not enough. Sometimes you have to be willing to establish your credibility in terms that skeptics can understand, even if you'd prefer not to. Sarah knew that Commander Hayes was referring to her own combat experience, which included a deployment to Iraq where she had been awarded a Bronze Star for her actions during a complex intelligence operation that had come under enemy fire. Commander Hayes rarely discussed the details of that deployment, but Sarah knew it had been a defining moment in her career. "I've been thinking about that," Sarah said. "But I hate the idea of having to justify my presence here by listing my credentials for people who should be focused on their own training." "I understand that feeling," Commander Hayes replied. "But sometimes leadership requires doing things we'd rather not do in order to achieve larger objectives. If one difficult recruit is affecting the entire training environment, then addressing his concerns might be necessary for the good of the program." After ending the call, Sarah spent the rest of the evening thinking about Commander Hayes' advice. She had always prided herself on letting her work speak for itself, but she was beginning to realize that approach might not be sufficient in this situation. The next morning brought a new challenge that would test everyone's abilities in ways they hadn't expected. The training schedule called for a complex urban warfare exercise that would take place in a specially designed facility that replicated the kind of environment special operations teams might encounter in overseas deployments. The exercise required careful coordination between multiple teams, with Sarah responsible for managing communications, logistics, and safety protocols. The scenario was based on a real-world mission profile, with teams tasked to infiltrate a simulated enemy compound, gather intelligence, and extract a high-value target without being detected. Everything began smoothly, with teams moving through their assigned routes according to the carefully planned timeline. Sarah monitored the exercise from a command center that allowed her to track all team movements and communications while coordinating with the instructors who were evaluating performance. Halfway through the exercise, however, a serious problem developed. One of the teams encountered an unexpected obstacle that forced them off their planned route, and their new position put them on a collision course with another team that was approaching from a different direction. The situation required immediate action to prevent the teams from compromising each other's positions and potentially failing their assigned missions. Sarah quickly assessed the situation and realized that she had seconds to make a decision that would affect the outcome of the exercise for both teams. She could order one team to hold their position while the other completed their route, but that would put the waiting team behind schedule and might force them to rush through critical phases of their mission. Alternatively, she could redirect one team to an alternate route, but that would require them to navigate terrain they hadn't studied and might expose them to additional risks. "Command, this is Team 2, came the voice of Team Leader Petty Officer Martinez over the radio. "We're encountering unexpected resistance and need guidance on how to proceed." Sarah keyed her microphone. "Team 2, stand by." She quickly pulled up the tactical map and identified an alternate route that would allow both teams to complete their missions without interfering with each other. The route was more challenging, requiring Team 2 to navigate through a section of the facility that had additional obstacles, but it was feasible if they moved quickly and efficiently. "Team 2, I'm sending you alternate route coordinates. The path is more challenging, but it will allow you to avoid the obstacle and complete your mission without compromising Team 4's position." "Copy, Command." Switching to alternate route, Sarah watched as Team 2 adjusted their approach, moving through the more difficult terrain with the skill and precision that had earned them places in the program. The alternate route added complexity to their mission, but it also provided additional training value by forcing them to adapt to unexpected circumstances. Both teams completed their mission successfully, with instructors noting that the additional challenges had actually improved the overall training value of the exercise. During the debriefing, Chief Rodriguez specifically commended Sarah's quick thinking and tactical awareness in managing the unexpected situation. That kind of real-time decision-making under pressure is exactly what operators need in the field, Rodriguez told the assembled recruits. Lieutenant Chen's ability to assess the situation, identify alternatives, and communicate clear instructions allowed both teams to succeed despite encountering complications. Despite the positive feedback from the instructors, Sarah could see that Morrison remained skeptical. During the break following the debriefing, she overheard him talking to his usual group of followers about her performance. "She got lucky," Morrison said dismissively. "Anyone could have looked at a map and found an alternate route. That doesn't require any special tactical knowledge." Walker nodded in agreement. "Right. It's not like she was down there with us dealing with the actual challenges." Sarah had heard enough. Morrison's constant criticism was affecting the training environment and undermining her ability to do her job effectively. It was time to address the situation directly, but she needed to do it in a way that would settle the matter once and for all rather than simply escalating the conflict. That afternoon, Sarah requested a meeting with the senior instructors to discuss the training program and address some concerns that had been developing. Chief Rodriguez and Master Chief Petty Officer Robert Sullivan, the facility's senior enlisted advisor, joined her in the conference room. "I want to talk to you about some dynamics that are affecting the training environment," Sarah began. "I think it's important that we address them before they impact the program's effectiveness." Rodriguez nodded. "You're talking about Morrison and his attitude problem." "Among other things, yes. His constant questioning of my authority is starting to influence other recruits, and I'm concerned that it's becoming a distraction from the training objectives." Master Chief Sullivan, a weathered veteran with over 20 years of experience in special operations, leaned forward. "What do you want us to do about it?" Sarah had been thinking about this question since her conversation with Commander Hayes. "I think it's time to provide some additional context about my background and qualifications. I've been reluctant to discuss certain aspects of my experience, but I think the situation requires it." Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. "What kind of context?" Sarah took a deep breath. "My naval intelligence work included several deployments where I was directly involved in special operations planning and execution. Some of that work is still classified, but there are details I can share that might help people like Morrison understand that my experience is more relevant than they realize." Master Chief Sullivan nodded approvingly. "I was wondering when you were going to stop letting that kid disrespect you. What do you need from us?" "I'd like to address the entire class tomorrow morning. Nothing dramatic, just a more complete briefing on my background and how it relates to the training they're receiving." "You got it," Rodriguez said. "But let me give you some advice. When you talk to these guys, don't apologize for not telling them everything before. You don't owe anyone a detailed explanation of your background just because they question whether you belong here." Sarah appreciated the support, but she also knew that the next day would be crucial in determining whether she could establish the authority and respect she needed to do her job effectively. Morrison had pushed the situation to a point where it required resolution, and she was ready to provide that resolution on her own terms. The next morning arrived with the kind of crisp clarity that seemed to sharpen everything into perfect focus. Sarah had spent most of the night preparing for what she knew would be a defining moment in her relationship with the recruit class. She had carefully considered what to reveal and how to present information that would establish her credibility without compromising operational security or appearing to justify her presence to people who should have accepted her authority from the beginning. The recruits filed into the briefing room with the usual mix of energy and apprehension that characterized the start of each training day. Sarah noticed that Morrison and his core group of followers took their usual seats in the back, while Bradley and several others who had been supportive sat closer to the front. The division in the room was subtle, but unmistakable. Chief Rodriguez and Master Chief Sullivan were also present, positioned at the sides of the room where they could observe the entire group. Their presence sent a clear message that this briefing was more significant than the routine administrative sessions the recruits had grown accustomed to. Sarah took her position at the podium and looked out at the assembled group. These were good men, warriors who had volunteered for some of the most dangerous and demanding service their country could ask of them. Most of them were professional and dedicated, but the toxicity that Morrison had been spreading was affecting everyone, and it needed to be addressed. "Gentlemen," Sarah began, "today I want to provide you with some additional context about my background and experience. I don't usually discuss these details because I believe that people should be judged on their current performance rather than their past achievements. However, recent events have convinced me that some clarification might be helpful." The room was completely silent. Even Morrison seemed to be paying attention, though his expression suggested he expected to hear the same kind of standard military biography that any officer might present. "I joined the Navy 8 years ago with the intention of pursuing a career in surface warfare," Sarah continued. During my first assignment, I was selected for additional training in intelligence analysis and operations. This led to a series of assignments that took me in directions I hadn't originally planned. She paused, choosing her words carefully. 3 years ago, I was assigned to a joint task force operating in Afghanistan. My role was officially listed as intelligence liaison, but the reality was more complex. The task force was responsible for conducting high-value target operations in areas where traditional intelligence gathering had been ineffective. Sarah could see that she now had everyone's complete attention. Even Morrison had straightened in his seat, apparently beginning to realize that her story might not unfold the way he had expected. The nature of our mission required intelligence personnel to work directly with special operations teams in the field. This wasn't a matter of sitting in an air-conditioned office analyzing reports. It meant going on raids, participating in interrogations, and making real-time decisions that affected the safety and success of operations. Chief Rodriguez was watching the recruits' reactions carefully. He could see that the dynamic in the room was shifting as Sarah provided details that painted a very different picture from the one Morrison had been promoting. During my 9 months with the task force, I participated in 43 operations, Sarah continued. These range from intelligence gathering missions in contested areas to direct action raids on enemy compounds. I was responsible for on-site analysis of captured materials, coordination with local intelligence assets, and tactical decision-making when situations didn't develop according to plan. She moved away from the podium, walking closer to the seated recruits. I learned very quickly that the theoretical knowledge I had gained in training was useful, but insufficient. Real operations are messy, complicated, and unpredictable. Equipment fails at the worst possible moments. Intelligence turns out to be incomplete or wrong. Weather doesn't cooperate with your timeline. And people, both friendly and enemy, make decisions that force you to adapt faster than you thought possible. Morrison was staring at her now, his earlier confidence replaced by something that looked like uncertainty. Sarah could see that he was beginning to understand that his assumptions about her background had been completely wrong. On February 15th of that year, our task force received intelligence about a high-value target who was planning an attack on a coalition base, Sarah continued, her voice becoming more intense. The intelligence was time-sensitive, and we had a narrow window to act before the target moved to a location where we couldn't reach him. The room was completely silent except for the sound of Sarah's voice and the barely audible hum of the air conditioning system. Every recruit was focused entirely on her words, apparently realizing that they were hearing about real events that had shaped someone's understanding of the kind of work they were training to do. The mission required a team of 8 operators to infiltrate a compound in a hostile area, capture or eliminate the target, and extract any intelligence materials before enemy reinforcements could arrive. I was assigned to accompany the team because the intelligence materials were expected to be in Arabic and Pashto, languages that I'd studied, but none of the operators were fluent in. Sarah paused, remembering details that she rarely allowed herself to think about. The insertion went smoothly, but when we reached the compound, we discovered that our intelligence had been partially wrong. The target was there, but so were twice as many enemy fighters as we had expected. The team leader had to make an immediate decision about whether to abort the mission or proceed with inadequate intelligence about enemy strength and positions. Chief Rodriguez was watching Morrison specifically, noting how the recruit's expression had changed from skepticism to intense interest. The other recruits were equally engaged, apparently beginning to understand that Sarah's experience was far more relevant to their training than they had realized. We proceeded with the mission, Sarah said. The operators moved to secure the target, while I focused on gathering intelligence materials from what appeared to be a communications center. We had been in the compound for approximately 10 minutes when enemy reinforcements arrived and engaged our perimeter security. Sarah could see that her story was having exactly the effect she had hoped for. The recruits were no longer thinking of her as an administrative officer who happened to be present during their training. They were beginning to see her as someone who had faced the same kinds of challenges they were preparing for. The firefight lasted for 37 minutes, Sarah continued. During that time, I was responsible for analyzing captured communications equipment to determine whether it contained actionable intelligence, coordinating with our extraction team to manage changes in the tactical situation, and providing real-time translation support when we captured 2 enemy personnel who had information about additional planned attacks. Morrison was leaning forward in his seat now, apparently completely absorbed in Sarah's account. The cynical expression he had worn for weeks had been replaced by something that looked like genuine respect for what he was hearing. The mission was successful, Sarah said. We eliminated the target, captured valuable intelligence, and extracted without losing any personnel. But the success came at a cost that none of us had fully anticipated when we planned the operation. She paused, allowing the weight of her words to settle over the room. 2 of the operators were wounded during the firefight. One of them, Staff Sergeant Michael Torres, was hit by shrapnel from a rocket-propelled grenade that detonated near his position. The other, Petty Officer First Class David Shun, was shot in the leg while providing cover for the extraction team. Sarah's voice became quieter, more personal. Staff Sergeant Torres died from his wounds 3 days later. Petty Officer Chun survived, but his injuries ended his career in special operations. The room was completely silent. Sarah could see that her story had affected everyone present, but she knew that she needed to connect it to the larger point she was trying to make about leadership, responsibility, and the complexity of military operations. I learned something important that night, Sarah continued. I learned that successful operations aren't just about individual courage or tactical skill, although both are essential. They're about the ability of teams to function effectively under extreme pressure, with everyone contributing their specialized knowledge and experience to achieve objectives that none of them could accomplish alone. She moved back toward the podium, making eye contact with as many recruits as possible. I also learned that leadership in combat isn't about being the toughest or most aggressive person in the room. It's about making good decisions based on incomplete information while understanding that the consequences of those decisions will affect real people in ways that can't be undone. Morrison looked uncomfortable now, apparently beginning to understand that his challenges to Sarah's authority had been based on fundamental misunderstandings about her experience and qualifications. When I was assigned to this training facility, Sarah continued, I was given the responsibility of ensuring that recruits like you receive the best possible preparation for the kinds of missions I've just described. That means managing logistics, coordinating with multiple departments, handling security protocols, and addressing any issues that might interfere with your learning. She paused, looking directly at Morrison. It also means ensuring that the training environment promotes the kind of mutual respect and professional cooperation that successful teams require. Personal conflicts, personality clashes, and power struggles have no place in organizations where people's lives depend on everyone doing their job at the highest possible level. The message was clear, and Morrison seemed to understand it. His face had reddened slightly, and he was avoiding eye contact with Sarah and the other recruits. The confrontational attitude that had characterized his behavior for weeks appeared to have evaporated. I want to be very clear about something, Sarah said, addressing the entire group. I'm not sharing these details about my background because I think I need to justify my presence here to anyone. I'm sharing them because I want you to understand that the people who are responsible for your training and development have been selected because of their qualifications and experience, not because of arbitrary factors like gender or appearance. Chief Rodriguez nodded approvingly from his position at the side of the room. Sarah's approach had been exactly what the situation required. Direct, informative, and authoritative without being defensive or apologetic. Your success in this program depends on many factors, Sarah continued. Your physical fitness, your tactical knowledge, your ability to work under pressure, and your capacity for learning new skills. But it also depends on your ability to respect and work effectively with everyone around you, regardless of whether they fit your preconceived notions about what a warrior should look like. She gestured toward the instructors. Chief Rodriguez has served in special operations for 15 years. Master Chief Sullivan has 22 years of experience in the most demanding assignments the Navy has to offer. Every instructor and staff member at this facility has been selected because they have something valuable to contribute to your development as operators. Sarah's voice became more intense. If you spend your time questioning the qualifications of the people who are here to help you succeed, you're wasting energy that should be focused on becoming the best possible version of yourself. More importantly, you're failing to develop the kind of professional attitude that successful operators require. Morrison was staring at his hands now, apparently unable or unwilling to meet anyone's gaze. Sarah could see that her message had hit home, but she wanted to make sure that the lesson was clear for everyone in the room. The enemy doesn't care about your opinions regarding gender roles or your comfort level with female leadership, Sarah said bluntly. What the enemy cares about is finding and exploiting any weakness in your team's ability to function effectively. If you allow personal prejudices or unprofessional attitudes to create divisions within your unit, you're giving the enemy exactly what they need to defeat you. The room remained silent as Sarah concluded her briefing. She had said what needed to be said, and now it was up to the recruits to decide how they would respond to the new information and the clear expectations she had established. "Are there any questions?" Sarah asked, looking around the room. No one spoke immediately, but finally Bradley raised his hand. "Ma'am, thank you for sharing that with us. I think I speak for most of the class when I say that we appreciate your service and the sacrifices you've made." Several other recruits nodded in agreement, and Sarah could see that the atmosphere in the room had fundamentally changed. Morrison's influence had been neutralized, and the respect she needed to do her job effectively had been established. "I appreciate that," Sarah replied. "But I want you to remember that every person who has served in combat has made sacrifices, and every person who has chosen to serve their country deserves respect regardless of their gender, background, or role. The best teams are the ones where everyone contributes their unique strengths to achieve common objectives." As the recruits filed out of the briefing room to begin their next training session, Sarah noticed that several of them approached Morrison. From their body language, it appeared that they were having serious conversations about his behavior and attitude. She couldn't hear what was being said, but she could see that Morrison looked embarrassed and somewhat isolated. Chief Rodriguez approached Sarah as the room emptied. "That was well done," he said. "You gave them exactly what they needed to hear." "I hope so," Sarah replied. "I hate that it was necessary, but I think the situation required it." Master Chief Sullivan joined them. "You handled that perfectly." Morrison needed to understand that his assumptions were wrong, and the rest of the class needed to see that you're not someone who could be pushed around or disrespected. Sarah nodded, feeling a sense of relief that the confrontation was finally over. Now we can focus on what we're really here to accomplish. As she gathered her materials and prepared for the rest of the day's activities, Sarah reflected on the morning's events. She had been reluctant to share details about her combat experience, partly because she didn't want to be defined by those experiences, and partly because she preferred to let her current performance speak for itself. But sometimes leadership required doing things that were personally uncomfortable in order to achieve larger objectives. The important thing now was to ensure that the positive changes in the training environment were maintained and built upon. Morrison's attitude had been neutralized, but Sarah knew that real change would only come if the entire class committed to the kind of professionalism and mutual respect that successful teams required. The transformation in the training environment was immediate and profound. In the days following Sarah's revelation about her combat experience, the entire dynamic among the recruits shifted toward the kind of professional respect and cooperation that successful military units required. Morrison, who had been the source of so much tension, became notably quiet and focused, apparently wrestling with the realization that his assumptions and behavior had been completely inappropriate. The change was most evident during the practical exercises, where teamwork and communication were essential for success. Sarah noticed that recruits who had previously been influenced by Morrison's negative attitude now participated more actively in briefings and showed genuine interest in learning from everyone around them. The questions they asked became more thoughtful and professional, focused on improving their performance rather than testing authority. Bradley approached Sarah after a particularly complex urban warfare exercise to thank her for her candor about her background. "Ma'am, I want you to know that your briefing really opened my eyes," he said. "I thought I understood what leadership looked like, but hearing about your experiences made me realize that I had a pretty narrow view." "What do you mean?" Sarah asked, genuinely interested in his perspective. "Well, I think a lot of us assumed that leadership in combat was mostly about being physically tough and making quick decisions under fire. But the way you described coordinating multiple elements while analyzing intelligence and managing communications, that's a completely different kind of complexity." Sarah appreciated Bradley's thoughtfulness. Combat leadership requires many different skills, and the most successful leaders are the ones who understand that they can't do everything themselves. They have to rely on their team members' expertise while providing the coordination and decision-making that keeps everyone focused on the mission. Bradley nodded. "That makes sense. I guess I was thinking about leadership too narrowly." Conversations like this became more common as the training progressed. Sarah found that recruits were now approaching her with genuine questions about tactics, logistics, and leadership rather than the subtle challenges that had characterized Morrison's approach. The change allowed her to function more effectively in her role, while also providing mentorship that enhanced the overall training experience. Morrison himself remained largely silent for several days, apparently processing the new information about Sarah's background and reconsidering his own behavior. Sarah noticed that he was working harder during physical training and paying closer attention during briefings, but he seemed reluctant to engage in the kind of interactions that had previously defined his presence in the group. The situation reached a turning point during a complex amphibious assault exercise that required precise coordination between multiple teams operating from different platforms. The scenario was based on a real-world mission profile, with teams tasked to conduct simultaneous operations that would test everything they had learned about communication, timing, and mutual support. Sarah was responsible for managing communications and logistics from the command vessel, coordinating between the various teams while tracking their progress, and ensuring that safety protocols were followed. The exercise was more complex than anything the recruits had attempted before, requiring them to demonstrate not only individual skills, but also the kind of unit cohesion that would be essential in actual operations. The first phase of the exercise proceeded smoothly, with teams successfully executing their assigned infiltration routes and establishing positions near their objectives. However, as the operation entered its most critical phase, a series of equipment failures and communication problems began to create confusion that threatened the success of the entire exercise. Team 3, led by Morrison, encountered radio problems that prevented them from maintaining contact with the command vessel. At the same time, Team 2 discovered that their route to the extraction point was blocked by unexpected obstacles, forcing them to request permission to use an alternate path that would bring them dangerously close to Team 4's operational area. Sarah found herself managing multiple crises simultaneously, with incomplete information and limited time to make decisions that would affect the outcome of the exercise for all involved teams. The situation was exactly the kind of complex, high-pressure scenario that real-world operations presented, and how she handled it would demonstrate whether the lessons about leadership and teamwork had been internalized by the recruits. "Command, this is Team 2 leader," came the voice of Petty Officer Martinez over the radio. "We need immediate guidance on alternate extraction routes. Our primary path is compromised." Before Sarah could respond, her radio operator reported that they were receiving an emergency signal from Team 3, though the specifics were unclear due to their communication problems. Sarah quickly assessed the tactical situation, reviewing the positions of all teams and the various options available for resolving the multiple problems simultaneously. She realized that the solution would require one team to delay their timeline while another adjusted their route, and both changes would need to be coordinated with the extraction vessels that were operating on a strict schedule. "Team 2, stand by for alternate route coordinates," Sarah transmitted, while simultaneously signaling for a radio operator to attempt contact with Team 3 using backup communication protocols. Within seconds, she had developed a solution that would allow all teams to complete their missions safely while maintaining the training value of the exercise. Team 2 would be directed to a route that avoided conflict with Team 4, while Team 3 would be given updated extraction coordinates that accounted for their communication difficulties. "Team 2, I'm transmitting alternate coordinates that will take you to Extraction Point Charlie. The route is longer, but avoids the obstacles you've encountered. Estimated travel time is 12 minutes. Copy, Command. Moving to Extraction Point Charlie." Sarah then turned her attention to Team 3's situation. The backup communication protocols had succeeded in establishing contact, and she learned that Morrison's team had completed their primary objective, but was experiencing equipment problems that prevented them from reaching their original extraction point. "Team 3, this is Command. Understand you have equipment problems affecting your extraction. Confirm your current position and status." Morrison's voice came through clearly on the backup channel. "Command, Team 3 is at the primary objective with mission complete. We have 2 personnel with equipment malfunctions that are affecting mobility. Request guidance on modified extraction procedures." Sarah could hear something in Morrison's voice that she hadn't noticed before. Gone was the cocky confidence that had characterized his earlier communications. Instead, she heard the focused professionalism of someone who understood that he was dealing with a serious situation that required clear thinking and effective coordination. Team 3. I'm coordinating with the extraction vessel to modify your pickup schedule. Maintain your current position and prepare for extraction at your location in 15 minutes. The solution required Sarah to coordinate with multiple vessels and adjust the timeline for the entire exercise, but it allowed all teams to complete their missions successfully while accommodating the equipment problems that Morrison's team had encountered. As the exercise concluded and all teams were safely extracted, Sarah reflected on how differently the situation had been handled compared to the kinds of interactions she had experienced with Morrison earlier in the training cycle. Instead of questioning her decisions or suggesting alternative approaches, Morrison had clearly communicated his team's situation and requested guidance, then followed her instructions without hesitation. During the post-exercise debriefing, the instructors praised all teams for their performance and specifically noted the effective communication and coordination that had allowed the exercise to succeed despite multiple equipment failures. Chief Rodriguez addressed the group about the lessons learned. What you experience today is typical of real-world operations. Equipment fails, communications break down, and situations develop that weren't covered in your original plan. Success depends on your ability to communicate clearly, follow instructions, and trust the people who are responsible for coordinating the overall operation. After the debriefing, Morrison approached Sarah privately. He appeared nervous, as if he wasn't sure how to begin the conversation he wanted to have. "Ma'am, I was hoping I could speak with you for a few minutes," Morrison said, his tone more respectful than Sarah had ever heard from him. "Of course," Sarah replied, gesturing toward a quiet area where they could talk without being overheard. Morrison seemed to struggle with how to express what he wanted to say. "I owe you an apology," he began. "My behavior over the past few weeks has been completely inappropriate, and I want you to know that I understand that." Sarah was pleased to hear Morrison acknowledge his behavior, but she was more interested in understanding whether he had genuinely learned from the experience or was simply going through the motions of an apology. "What specifically do you think you need to apologize for?" Sarah asked. Morrison took a deep breath. "I made assumptions about your background and qualifications that were based on prejudice rather than facts. I questioned your authority in ways that were disrespectful and unprofessional, and I influenced other recruits to adopt the same negative attitudes that I was displaying." "Why do you think you acted that way?" Sarah asked. Morrison considered the question carefully. "I think I was insecure about my own readiness for this training, and instead of focusing on improving myself, I looked for ways to feel superior by putting other people down. When I saw someone in a position of authority who didn't fit my preconceived notions about what a military leader should look like, I used that as an excuse to question things I should have accepted." Sarah appreciated Morrison's honesty and self-awareness. "What do you plan to do differently going forward?" "I want to focus on becoming the best operator I can be," Morrison replied. "That means respecting everyone I work with and learning from their experience, regardless of whether they fit my expectations. It also means supporting the team instead of creating divisions that make everyone less effective." Sarah nodded. "I appreciate your apology, and I think your analysis of the situation is accurate. The question now is whether you can maintain that level of self-awareness and professionalism for the rest of the training cycle and beyond." Morrison looked directly at her. "Ma'am, I give you my word that I will. I've learned something important about myself and about leadership, and I don't want to waste that opportunity." The conversation marked a turning point not just for Morrison, but for the entire training class. Word of his apology spread quickly among the recruits, and Sarah noticed that the few remaining pockets of skepticism about her authority disappeared completely. The training environment became characterized by the kind of mutual respect and professional cooperation that she had hoped for from the beginning. In the weeks that followed, Morrison became one of the most dedicated and professional recruits in the class. He threw himself into every aspect of the training with an intensity that impressed both instructors and fellow recruits. More importantly, he became a positive influence on others, encouraging teamwork and professional behavior while demonstrating the kind of personal growth that military training was designed to foster. Sarah found herself developing a grudging respect for Morrison's ability to acknowledge his mistakes and commit to meaningful change. While she couldn't forget his earlier behavior, she appreciated his willingness to take responsibility for his actions and make genuine efforts to improve. The transformation was particularly evident during a complex multi-day exercise that required teams to operate independently while maintaining coordination with overall mission objectives. Morrison's team performed exceptionally well, demonstrating not only tactical proficiency, but also the kind of mature leadership and communication skills that successful special operations required. During one particularly challenging phase of the exercise, Morrison's team encountered a situation that required them to provide assistance to another team that was experiencing difficulties. Instead of focusing solely on his own team's objectives, Morrison took the initiative to coordinate with Sarah and the other team leaders to develop a solution that would allow both teams to succeed. "Command, this is Team Leader Morrison," came his voice over the radio. "Team 5 is encountering navigation difficulties in our operational area. Request permission to provide assistance while maintaining our own mission timeline." Sarah was impressed by Morrison's tactical awareness and willingness to prioritize overall mission success over his team's individual performance. "Team Leader Morrison, you are authorized to provide assistance to Team 5. Coordinate directly with their leader and keep me informed of any changes to your timeline." Morrison's response demonstrated the kind of professional competence and team-first attitude that she had hoped all recruits would develop. "Copy, Command. We'll coordinate with Team 5 and update you on our progress." The assistance that Morrison's team provided allowed both units to complete their mission successfully, and the exercise became an example of how effective leadership could maximize the performance of multiple teams working toward common objectives. As the training cycle entered its final weeks, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought the class from the early days of conflict and division to the current state of professional cooperation and mutual respect. The transformation hadn't been easy, and there had been moments when she wondered whether the situation could be salvaged. But the experience had taught valuable lessons about leadership, communication, and the importance of addressing problems directly rather than hoping they would resolve themselves. Morrison's personal growth had been the most dramatic, but Sarah noticed that other recruits had also benefited from the experience. They had learned that effective teams required members who could set aside personal prejudices and work together toward common goals. They had seen that leadership came in many forms and that success depended more on competence and character than on fitting predetermined stereotypes. Most importantly, they had learned that the military's emphasis on respect, discipline, and professionalism wasn't just about maintaining order, but about creating the conditions that allowed diverse groups of people to function as effective teams under the most challenging circumstances imaginable. The final weeks of the training cycle brought a series of comprehensive exercises designed to test everything the recruits had learned during their time at the facility. These capstone events would determine not only who would graduate from the program, but also how well they had internalized the lessons about teamwork, leadership, and professional excellence that would define their careers as special operations personnel. Sarah found herself working closely with the senior instructors to design scenarios that would challenge the recruits in ways that replicated the complexity and unpredictability of real-world missions. The exercises needed to test not only individual skills, but also the unit cohesion and mutual trust that had developed over the course of the training cycle. The transformation in the group's dynamics had been remarkable to observe. Where there had once been tension and division, there was now genuine respect and professional cooperation. Morrison had become one of the most reliable and respected members of the class, demonstrating leadership qualities that impressed both instructors and fellow recruits. More importantly, his personal growth had contributed to an overall atmosphere of excellence that elevated everyone's performance. The culminating exercise was scheduled to take place over a 4-day period, with multiple teams operating in a complex scenario that would require them to demonstrate every skill they had developed. The mission profile was based on a real-world operation that had been conducted several years earlier, modified to provide appropriate training challenges while maintaining security protocols. Sarah was responsible for overall coordination of the exercise, working from a command center that would allow her to monitor all team movements and communications while providing the kind of real-time support and guidance that operators could expect in actual missions. The role required her to balance multiple competing priorities while making decisions that would affect the success and safety of all participants. As the exercise began, Sarah watched with professional satisfaction as the teams moved through their assigned phases with precision and confidence. The recruits who had started the training cycle as talented but inexperienced individuals had developed into a cohesive unit capable of complex operations under demanding conditions. Morrison's team was assigned one of the most challenging objectives, requiring them to infiltrate a heavily defended compound, gather specific intelligence materials, and extract without compromising the operations of other teams working in the same general area. The mission tested not only tactical skills, but also the kind of leadership and decision-making under pressure that distinguished exceptional operators from merely competent ones. "Command, this is Team Leader Morrison," came his voice over the radio as his team reached their initial insertion point. "We're beginning our approach to the primary objective. All team members are in position, and equipment is functioning normally." Sarah monitored Morrison's progress along with that of the other teams, tracking their movements on the tactical display while maintaining awareness of the various factors that could affect the overall operation. Weather conditions were challenging but manageable, equipment was functioning within acceptable parameters, and all teams were performing at or above expected levels. However, as the exercise entered its most critical phase, an unexpected development forced Sarah to test her own leadership skills in ways she hadn't anticipated. One of the teams encountered a simulated casualty scenario that required immediate medical evacuation, while simultaneously discovering intelligence that suggested the presence of additional enemy forces in an area where another team was preparing to operate. The situation required Sarah to coordinate multiple response elements while ensuring that the training value of the exercise was maintained. She needed to arrange for the medical evacuation team to reach the simulated casualty without compromising the other team's operational security, while also adjusting the tactical plan to account for the new intelligence about enemy forces. "All team leaders, this is Command," Sarah transmitted, her voice calm and authoritative despite the complexity of the situation she was managing. "We have a medical evacuation in progress in Sector 7 and updated intelligence about enemy activity in Sector 4. Stand by for modified instructions." Working quickly with the exercise controllers, Sarah developed a coordination plan that would allow the medical evacuation to proceed while enabling the team in Sector 4 to adjust their approach based on the new intelligence. The solution required precise timing and clear communication between multiple elements, exactly the kind of complex coordination that real-world operations demanded. "Team Leader Bradley, adjust your approach to Objective Charlie to avoid the area of enemy activity identified in Sector 4. Your new route will add approximately 15 minutes to your timeline, but will ensure operational security." "Copy, Command. Adjusting route to avoid Sector 4. Team Leader Morrison, your objective remains unchanged, but be advised that the medical evacuation in Sector 7 may affect traffic patterns in your extraction area. Prepare to use alternate extraction points if necessary." Morrison's response demonstrated the professional competence he had developed over the course of the training cycle. "Understood, Command. We have alternate extraction points identified and will adapt based on the tactical situation." As Sarah continued to coordinate the various elements of the exercise, she was struck by how effectively the recruits were responding to the changing circumstances. Instead of becoming confused or frustrated by the complications, they were demonstrating exactly the kind of flexibility and professional confidence that successful special operations required. The medical evacuation was completed successfully, with the affected team member safely extracted while maintaining the security of the ongoing operations. The intelligence about additional enemy forces proved to be accurate within the context of the exercise, and Bradley's team was able to adjust their approach to avoid potential contact while still achieving their assigned objectives. Morrison's team faced the most significant challenge when their primary extraction point became unavailable due to the medical evacuation activities. Instead of requesting detailed instructions from the command center, Morrison demonstrated initiative by conducting his own tactical assessment and selecting an alternate extraction point that would allow his team to complete their mission without interfering with other operations. "Command, this is Team Leader Morrison. Based on current traffic in our primary extraction area, we're moving to Extraction Point Delta. Our timeline will be delayed by approximately 10 minutes, but we can complete the mission without affecting other operations." Sarah was impressed by Morrison's tactical awareness and decision-making. Rather than simply following predetermined procedures, he had analyzed the situation, identified alternatives, and made a sound decision that prioritized overall mission success. It was exactly the kind of leadership that special operations units needed from their personnel. "Team Leader Morrison, Your decision to move to Extraction Point Delta is approved. Well done on the tactical assessment. As the exercise concluded with all teams successfully completing their objectives, Sarah reflected on the remarkable journey that had brought this group of recruits from their initial state of division and conflict to their current level of professional excellence. The transformation hadn't been easy or automatic, but it had been thorough and meaningful. During the final debriefing session, Chief Rodriguez addressed the assembled recruits about their performance and the lessons they had learned during the training cycle. Gentlemen, what you've accomplished over the past several weeks represents more than just technical proficiency, Rodriguez said. You've developed the kind of unit cohesion and professional respect that allows special operations teams to succeed in the most challenging environments imaginable. Master Chief Sullivan nodded in agreement. The most important thing you've learned isn't how to use any particular weapon or piece of equipment. You've learned how to work effectively with people who bring different backgrounds, perspectives, and skills to the team. That's what makes the difference between good operators and great ones. Sarah was invited to address the group as part of the final ceremony. As she looked out at the faces of the recruits who had challenged, frustrated, and ultimately impressed her, she felt a sense of professional satisfaction that went beyond any individual achievement. When I first met this class, Sarah began, I saw a group of talented individuals who had the potential to become exceptional operators. What I wasn't sure about was whether you would develop the professional maturity and mutual respect that successful teams require. She paused, making eye contact with Morrison and several other recruits who had been part of the early conflicts. I'm pleased to say that you've exceeded my expectations. You've learned that effectiveness in special operations isn't just about individual capabilities. It's about the ability to function as part of a team where everyone contributes their unique strengths toward common objectives. Morrison raised his hand. Ma'am, I'd like to say something on behalf of the class. Sarah nodded for him to proceed. Morrison stood, his posture reflecting the confidence and professionalism he had developed during the training cycle. We want to thank you for your leadership during this training cycle. More importantly, we want to apologize for the disrespect and unprofessional behavior that some of us displayed early in the program. He looked directly at Sarah. You taught us that leadership comes in many forms, and that the most effective leaders are the ones who focus on mission accomplishment and team welfare rather than personal recognition or validation. We've learned that respect isn't something that should be based on superficial characteristics, but on competence, character, and commitment to excellence. The other recruits nodded in agreement, and Sarah could see that Morrison was speaking for the entire group. The young man who had once questioned her authority and competence had become a thoughtful leader who understood the importance of professional respect and team unity. I appreciate those words, Sarah replied, but I want you to remember that the real test of what you've learned here will come when you're serving in operational units. The lessons about teamwork, respect, and professionalism aren't just important during training, they're essential for success in the real world. As the ceremony concluded and the recruits prepared to move on to their next assignments, several of them approached Sarah individually to thank her and express their appreciation for her leadership during the training cycle. The conversations were genuine and heartfelt, reflecting the personal growth that had occurred alongside the professional development. Morrison was the last to approach her, and his conversation lasted longer than the others. Ma'am, I want you to know that this training cycle has been the most important learning experience of my military career, he said. Not because of the tactical skills, although those were important, but because of what I learned about leadership and what it really means to be part of a team. Sarah was genuinely moved by Morrison's sincerity. What specifically did you learn that you think will be most important going forward? Morrison thought for a moment. I learned that my assumptions about people are often wrong, and that questioning someone's qualifications based on limited information says more about my own insecurities than about their capabilities. I also learned that the best leaders are the ones who create environments where everyone can contribute their best work, regardless of their background or personal characteristics. Those are valuable lessons, Sarah replied. But the most important thing is whether you'll remember them when you're facing new challenges in different environments. Morrison nodded. The experience had reinforced her belief that effective leadership required both professional competence and the courage to confront difficult situations when they arose. It had also demonstrated that respect and authority couldn't be taken for granted, but had to be earned through consistent performance and principled action. Most importantly, the training cycle had shown that even the most challenging interpersonal conflicts could be resolved when people were willing to set aside their preconceptions and focus on common objectives. The recruits who had graduated from the program were not only better operators, but also better leaders, equipped with the kind of professional maturity that would serve them well throughout their careers. 6 months later, Sarah received a letter from Morrison, who was serving with a SEAL team in overseas deployment. The letter was brief, but meaningful, expressing his continued appreciation for the lessons he had learned during the training cycle and reporting that he was applying those lessons successfully in his operational assignment. "The leadership principles you taught us have been invaluable in my current unit," Morrison wrote. "I've had opportunities to work with personnel from different backgrounds and specialties, and I've tried to approach each situation with the kind of respect and professionalism you demonstrated during our training. It has made me a better operator and a better teammate."